Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Sometimes people here around Redeemer will ask me how I get my ideas for these morning Pastor Gary Live segments. I always answer that the daily topics aren't hard at all, but coming up with the weekly topics that fit into 5 or 10 segments in natural ways can be very hard. And so I jumped right on it when someone in a recent Sunday school class asked me if there were parables in the Bible that were told by people other than Jesus. Immediately I thought, what a great Pastor Gary Live topic. Because you see, indeed there are. There are parables scattered throughout the Old Testament and told by different people. I can't say they're numerous, but they are there. And this week we're going to look at 4 of them as something of a sampler. I know I said that I look for things that fit into sets of 5, but I'm doing 4 Old Testament parables because before we do that, we need to talk just a bit about what a parable is. That's the plan for today. Jesus often tended to preach using stories that we have come to call parables. And you might have noticed that I have seldom talked about these in these morning moments. It used to be said that parables were simple stories with a simple meaning, but I find that nothing could be further from the truth. The parables of Jesus are highly complex, and often there are more meanings that come out of them than you can shake a stick at. These are highly complex stories, and they can be hard to get a handle on them in the time we typically have each morning. Let me give you an example from a story you know well. What is the parable of the prodigal son about? Well, most of us will answer quickly. It's about a boy who gives up his inheritance and then when things go badly is welcomed home again. And then we might add that his welcome is how God welcomes us when we go astray. And you would be right in that. However, why then does the story go on about the older brother? You see, when the wayward brother comes home, the story isn't finished. Jesus continues the story to talk about the other brother who had stayed around and done what he was supposed to do, and now was complaining about the unfairness of the welcome his wayward brother received when he himself had gotten nothing. Then we need to ask, where are we in the parable? Are we wayward and in need of coming home to God's embrace? Are we faithfully steady and caught up in what's right and fair and need a deeper understanding of grace, not just for the wayward brother, but for us in our sanctimonious self-righteousness too? And what about the father who has grace and understanding for these 2 somewhat nasty brothers? What does the parable say about how we treat our brothers and sisters? How can we fathom a love and forgiveness and grace given by the Father? And what does that say about God's grace for us? Why do so many think that this parable ought not to be called the prodigal son, but the Father who forgave? And these are just a few of the many issues that this parable raises, as do all of Jesus' parables. One commentator I like a lot has said that the parables of Jesus are a lot like a Salvador Dali painting. You have a beautiful landscape, and then suddenly in the middle there's a wilted clock, and you stare at the painting and try to make sense of an ordered world that is suddenly distorted. Jesus' parables do something like that. There's some sort of twist in them that turns the world we know and expect upside down. Some sort of twist that makes us think and ponder and wonder and work with the story to make sense of it. It's interesting that Jesus almost never explains his parables, but leaves them hanging, dangling in our hearts, and waiting to be massaged and worked with. We can look at the story from the viewpoints of different characters. We can explore each character we most identify with and why. We can discern how the parable speaks to us. Most of the parables of Jesus begin with him saying, the kingdom of God is like. Well, we can ask ourselves, how is the kingdom of God like this? So I hope you can see these are not just simple stories. And that's why I haven't dealt with many parables for these Pastor Gary Live segments. Sometimes I could probably spend an entire week on just one parable and still not cover everything. Now, this week we are going to look at some of the other parables in the Bible, parables from the Old Testament. Most of these are told to specific people at specific times and for a specific reason, so they aren't quite the same as the parables of Jesus. Nevertheless, I think you will find that they also speak to us. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.